In the Arena with Monsignor Kieran Harrington on 710 WOR.
Hey gang, welcome back to In the Arena. My name is Monsignor Kieran Harrington, and of course we're at the very end of Hanukkah. And I'm very grateful to have with me as a guest Dr. Meryl Ain, who is a career educator and co-author of the award-winning 2014 book, My Living Memories Project, Legacies That Last. Welcome to In the Arena, Meryl.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Doctor, why don't you tell us a little bit about what is Living Memories Project?
Okay, the Living Memories Project, it started out with our first book, Living Memories Project, Legacies That Last, and then I just did a companion, a journal to it. We have a website and we have a Facebook page. And it came out of my own grappling with grief after my father died and then my mother died a year and a half later.
Just about 18 months, right?
Right. And I had a tremendous amount of difficulty crawling out of my own grief. So I started speaking with people, and I found out that there is no such thing as closure. But something that appealed to me and I thought was very comforting and helpful was that I learned from individuals how they keep the memories of their loved ones alive. And that's the basis for the books.
Why is that important to keep the memories of loved ones alive?
It's important because when somebody dies, they're not physically present, but if you love them, you still have a relationship with them. In fact, there's a Buddhist saying that says, when my loved one was alive, I knew him in 50 different ways. Now that he's gone, I know him in 49. So your loved one is not physically present, but when you keep the memories alive, he or she is still with you.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that you've interviewed 32 people, I think, right?
We interviewed 32 people for the first book.
And how did they transform, these 32 people, their grief into sort of meaning and meaningful action?
Well, the interesting thing is that people did it in a variety of ways, from something as simple as a photograph. So, for instance, we interviewed the late Jack Klugman, who had a very close relationship with Tony Randall, his co-actor. And he was devastated when he died. And he said, when I want Tony close to me, I just look at pictures. I have pictures of him all over my house. So it could be something as simple as pictures. It could be making the recipes of a loved one. It could be a memory quilt, or it could be something very ambitious. For instance, Steve and Liz Alderman of Westchester, their son Peter was killed on 9/11 at the World Trade Center, and they created a foundation for victims of torture terrorism where they go all over the third world, and they set up with the indigenous experts mental health clinics in Peter's name.
Do you think there is a difference by how a person who might believe in the afterlife looks at death and suffering than somebody who doesn't, who believes that this is the end?
That's a difficult question. I really don't know. I think that you can keep memories alive whether you do believe in the afterlife or if you don't. I would think that, believing in an afterlife does give you an additional layer of comfort. So, for instance, Mary Ann Statch, who is quoted in the book, who happened to be my secretary, she's a very strong Catholic, and she believes that she will be reunited with her mother, and she tells the story in the book of her son, who is a New York City policeman, and he was in a terrible car accident, and he survived. And unbeknownst to her, he always had her mother, his grandmother's mass card with him, and she feels, they both feel, that her mother is always there protecting him. However, if you don't believe so, I still strongly believe that keeping those memories alive is very comforting. It's very healing.
That's the question, right? Because sometimes memories are also not good, right? When somebody dies and you have very conflicted feelings about them.
That's true. And I would say right off the bat that if you have very negative feelings about somebody, this approach might not work. But if you have conflicted feelings, or for instance, if you have guilt associated with your relationship, or you are focusing more on how the person died rather than how the person lived. This approach enables you to concentrate on how they lived and on the positive memories. Because they're negative memories, they're all associated with anybody.
I mean,
but nothing's perfect.
That's right. You you love your parents, and they did a good job, but maybe there were some times where there was a mistake and it was hurtful, and you kind of look at that. What's the prism you see things through?
And in fact, we interviewed Malachi McCord, who is the brother of Frank McCord, who wrote Angela's Ashes. And Malachi is, an author and a raconteur and an actor in his own right. And he says, his attitude is you have to forgive and get rid of the negative stuff. And he follows, he says, the Irish tradition of keeping people alive in story and song. In fact, we have a quote from him that says, death is not fatal, because you keep people alive through the stories you tell, through the songs you sing, by entertaining them, and they entertain us.
You interviewed Sherry Mandel, who 13 years whose 13-year-old son Kobe was brutally murdered in 2001 near Jerusalem. Why don't you tell us about your meeting with her and her story?
Well, I mean, this was a terrible, terrible tragedy. He was a 13-year-old boy, and the family was just devastated. And Sherry says, there's no way that you're ever going to get over it. But she says that it is grief is energy, it's power, and you harness it for good. And she gives the analogy of Noah after the flood. So what the Mandel family did, in order to help other bereaved children and families, is that they set up a whole network of camps in Israel, where they bring these children and these families together, and it is very, very healing for them. And both in the case of the Mandels and the Aldermans, this has become their life's work, so they are carrying on their son's traditions, and they are the memories, and they're helping others in the process. So it's very inspiring.
I wonder, it's when someone is killed because of September 11th, you can kind of point to this is evil.
Right.
And this happened because of an evil person. The evil person did a terrible thing. Versus, a child dies from a mysterious illness of some sort. Different level, different because the explanations are different, right? And where God is in that whole equation is different too, isn't it?
Well, one of the things that I learned was that there are different kinds of losses. Some are timely, some are untimely, some are tragic, some are unspeakable. But I really think that there is no such thing as closure. Those we've loved are in our hearts forever. So, I would not presume, to make judgments about different kinds of losses. Clearly, if you have faith, that is something that you draw upon, and it's very comforting, and it provides a spiritual element to it. But there's also the idea that you can practice first, and then sometimes faith comes after the practicing. So maybe in keeping the memories alive, you feel a little glimmer of God in that. Mm-hmm.
What about Kubler-Ross? Speaks about the stages of grief, death, and dying. Does that play a role here in your Memories project?
Well, we interviewed a psychologist, Dr. Dan Gottlieb, and he claims that what she was talking about, that there there really is no such thing as closure. You know, the stages of grief. I mean, what I've learned is that everybody's entitled to grieve individually. There's no timetable to it. And I don't know that we can make, blanket statements. Every grief is very individual. But, my hope would be for people that if they have had a loss, and especially, an untimely loss, that they not spend their entire lives in grief, that the loved one would really want them to do something positive in their memory. And I think, doing that can help you transcend that wrenching, awful grief. I mean, obviously, you're always going to feel the loss, but doing something to keep the memories alive, at least we found, and I wrote the first book with my brother and my husband actually lost both his parents while we were doing the book. We just learned so much from the people we interviewed, and we found it so cathartic and therapeutic. And so the first book was a tribute to my mother, and then the second book, I got the idea from a couple of people we interviewed in the book, Nick Clooney, who's the father of George, the actor, and Yo Chang Ma, who happens to be the sister of Yo-Yo Ma. And they said, establish a scholarship in the memory of your loved ones. So I established a scholarship in the Brentwood schools where my father was a teacher and a principal. And I go every year, and I have the opportunity to present these scholarships to 2 deserving young people. And I think it does more for me than it does for them.
Dr. Meryl Ain is a career educator and co-author of the award-winning 2014 book, My Living Memories Project, Legacies That Last. You can find it on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. Very, very worthwhile project, especially as we start the new year. And thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank
you can see the sincerity and really the love in your eyes and about this work. And so thank you for being with us.
Thank
here
you.
in Arena.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.